If you or anyone else you know is in the market to buy or sell a home, make sure you visit ccrealty.org today. We are the only real estate brokerage that donates 50% of its commissions to nonprofits dedicated to fighting climate change, and we operate in all 50 states. Enjoy the podcast. Katherine, really nice to meet you. Thanks so much for taking some time to come on the podcast. Really appreciate it.
Hello. Hi, I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, happy to have you. Hello to you. Hello to audience. Hello to everyone who's interested in making the world a better place. And we always like to get this show started with some background on who you are and how you got to be doing what you're doing at the current moment.
Well, hi, I'm Katherine. I'm coming in from Toronto, Canada, so from the north. I am an environmental engineering graduate, currently working in the sustainability field. Specifically, I'm working for a startup called Standard Carbon, who is drenching themselves in the environmental world, specifically greenhouse gas emission inventory quantification and verification validation of greenhouse gas claims and statements. So that's who I am. I love animals. I volunteer at a rescue farm. I am Polish, and I've always loved the environment. I've always wanted to take care of the environment. So now that's what I'm doing.
And you're killing it. So I found that very interesting about your background, how you've kind of always been an environmentalist. And I'd love to hear kind of more about, I suppose, why do you think that is and what kind of draws you to have that like connection with the natural world?
Growing up, my parents always, every vacation that we took was always like camping. I used to hate it, I'll be honest. I used to camping, skiing, always involved around nature. And and then slowly as I started to grow up, it clicked. And there was one time where I was a tchotchke kid. So my parents left to go somewhere, and I was at home watching some CTV, or that's like a Canadian news reporting page, and I was watching it, and there was a show about how on the West Coast there's a type of beetle that was invasive species actually coming in and killing off a bunch of the West Coast trees, and they were showing like a, a map of the trees basically being killed off and receding. And I just got so upset. I think I was like 12, and my parents came home, they're like, "What's wrong?" And I was like, "The trees, like climate change, because every year it's getting warmer, the bugs aren't dying and they're eating all the..." And then ever since then I've been encircling myself in this world and fueling, ironically, use of words, but fueling my passion for taking care of our planet and making sure that the next generations have something, not just
Yeah.
not just soil.
Soil or dirt, really.
Yeah.
The soil is alive.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah, we've got a really interesting soil episode right after this, but that was a very specific story. I like that.
Mm-hmm.
It's just ingrained in you, a care. I don't know. I wasn't that connected to the trees when I went to summer camp for 10 years, and the hiking guy, like the guy who was like in charge of the hiking trips, would always be like, if you like, I would walk by the trees and I would like pull the little pine needles off, and he'd be like, "Don't do that. Like, imagine if I'm just gonna come over and like rip your finger off." And I was like, "Oh, that's not the same thing." But it is interesting. There's like more data coming out that trees actually like can feel the presence of people around them and stuff, and electromagnetic different things. Yeah. Well, we'll go deep on a nature podcast. We're going to talk about carbon today, but thanks for your background. I appreciate it. I think it's awesome. Do you want to tell me about the North Forge Founders Program and kind of how you were involved with that?
So Standard Carbon, basically it's a program that helps boost and grow local businesses, or Canadian, not just Canadian, but startup businesses. I wasn't too involved in that, but
Gotcha.
It's basically a way to help create a collaboration between startup businesses and help businesses just like give them another leg up to communicate to the world what they're doing. And yes.
Is that like the origin story? Is it kind of like an accelerator for like companies that are focusing on
Yeah,
specific things?
it sort of works like an accelerator. It gives it gives companies either a platform or different resources that they could use to help either catalyze, like they help become they're trying to become like a catalyst for these startup businesses to help them become more successful or go in a direction that they're trying to go into. Um,
Gotcha.
yeah.
So when and how did you get involved with Standard Carbon then?
So I've been October 2021 is when I started my position at Standard Carbon. So I'm still a little bit new, but I think I hope I'm finally getting the hang of things. Um, yeah, before that I was working in the corporate world. I was working a little bit in the municipal governance world, and I realized that working in the corporate world I wasn't really satisfied. I didn't really feel that individuals cared about what I was doing. I was an environmental specialist, and so what I was trying to relay, it was kind of just bouncing back, and people were just doing what they had to do because customers were saying it, not necessarily it was the right thing to do. And then I was interviewed by Justin and Alex, which are the CEOs, and I just saw their passion and I saw what they were trying to do matched exactly what was happening on my inside. So um, yeah, it was kind of like the perfect opportunity, and I caught it, and I've been hanging out with Standard Carbon ever since.
Yeah, and a long ways to go, I'm sure. So when you say environmental specialist, is that like who you are? Or was that actually like a role that you were working at a large company?
That was my role. So I was everything from like environmental compliance all the way to greenhouse gas reporting. So that's how I started to get more involved into that world. All the way over from uh, also expanding into ESG, which I'm not sure if you're familiar with, like environmental social governance or corporate social responsibility, which we've been hearing a lot in the business world. But yeah, I wore so many different hats in that position, and it was really I grew a lot, and my skills expanded a lot, and it made me realize I really like the carbon world. So then this position came up, and I was like, perfect. Let me take my degree and let me take my knowledge of the carbon industry and utilize it.
Yeah, well, joining a startup, I don't think you're going to be wearing any less
No.
hats. I would suspect. Um, right. So why don't you tell me what is Standard Carbon and why does the company exist?
So Standard Carbon obviously is a startup. They were created on the preface of recognizing that there is a lot of greenwashing. That happens in our industry, and greenwashing, if you're not aware, is basically people, companies, corporations claiming A, but on the subsurface not actually doing that, or making something sound like it's a lot more significant than it is. So it could be like anything from like a piece of product saying, "Buy us, we are low waste, we're made out of paper," and then you peel off the paper underneath, it's still plastic. So that's like a form of greenwashing. And basically Standard Carbon recognized that there's a lot of claims that are being put out there that nobody's actually checking them. Nobody's a company saying, "Hey, we're going net zero by 2050, and we reduced our carbon footprint so far by XYZ," and nobody's actually coming in saying, "Yeah, this is correct. We've looked at your work, we've audited your work, and um, we could stamp off on this." So Standard Carbon came in, and now we're an accredited verification validation body, so we're able to go in and verify or validate that information that a company is claiming or stating. As well as we also look into and help companies quantify their actual greenhouse gas emissions, to basically start their carbon reduction journey.
Which we need all the companies to at least start the journey,
Yeah.
if not kind of accelerate it at this point. Well, thank you for that. I don't know if this directly relates to the topic of greenwashing, but I'm not sure if you're aware. I just when you were talking about that, I was thinking of how you're talking about the companies. Yeah, it is relating to greenwashing, but it's not exactly the same thing. There, are you familiar? I'm not sure how it is in Canada, but the recycling symbol in the U.S. is it the same thing in Canada? Is it the three arrows?
Mm-hmm. And with the numbers inside?
No, 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 no. So here's the
Oh,
thing.
okay.
that there's these three arrows for the recycling symbol. It's green and they're big fat arrows, but there are also these sorting codes for different types of plastic that these companies created, and they made it three skinny arrows with numbers. So when you look at a plastic bottle, you think, oh, you just put it in the recycling, but no, it's not a recycling, it's a sorting code. And they totally, like, there's stuff like this all the time. That's what I think of when I think of like greenwashing. And companies like you, I don't know if you can put a stop to it, but you can definitely give power to the people who are doing the right thing and kind of get the word on that. So I just want to throw that in
Yeah.
multiple times in the podcast, because you look at your plastic bottles, and I mean, for years you think it's getting recycled, but really it's not. So
Yeah, unfortunately,
it's
I think I
problematic.
used to be like, it's the user, it's the user. No, we need to switch it over to the producer, because
Right.
we as a user, as a society, are trying our best, and most of us, unless you're actually interested and knowledgeable of the recycling world, you don't know half this stuff. It's like if you put your
Right.
glass peanut butter jar in the recycling, if it's still full of peanut butter, it's not going to get recycled. I know that, but most people
Hmm.
don't know that, because the recycling industry is just so specific, and
Yeah.
so changing it's changing literally every week.
Right. Oh my God. I went to this bulk food store last year, and they have this piece of paper up on the wall. And I don't remember what the number was, but it was like some ridiculous, like 60 million jars of peanut butter are consumed in the US, just the US, like each year. Like, you can imagine how much plastic that is. Crazy. Anyways, all right. Standard carbon. I do want to ask about the Standards Council of Canada's ISO 14065 2020 standard. What is that, and how did Standard Carbon earn that accreditation? So that
Accreditation.
was very interesting to me. Accreditation.
Yes. So Standard Council of Canada is almost like of the equivalent of, I'm not sure if you heard of AICPA.
Mm-mm.
No. Okay. It's basically it's a national accreditation body that is able to um, a national accreditation body that takes different systems, whether that's like greenhouse gas verification validation systems or quality systems, and comes in and checks and confirms that the individual or the body in is competent enough to be claiming and doing what they're doing, if that makes sense. So
It does.
we came in, we were audited by the Standard Council. First, there was an initial, there's like a whole process, but there's like an initial documentation assessment. And then we came in and we were audited by the Standard Council of Canada. We were interviewed. We went through a whole week's process worth of just checking our procedures, our documents, who I am, why I'm competent, who else is involved in the team, and who else would be a part of the greenhouse gas verification validation process at Standard Carbon. And they said, yep, you guys are enough. And they gave us the okay a couple weeks ago, and now we're officially an accredited. I use the term VVB, which is a verification validation body,
Mm-hmm.
and it's recognized internationally as well.
Okay, internationally. So that's like a government council of Canada. And where do they get their standards from?
Um,
Like science
I I'm
people?
not sure, to be honest.
Yeah.
I that I would have to honestly go check on their website, because I'm actually not too familiar. I'm I
Yeah.
recognize their name from like years and years of working in the ISO world, which is the international standards world. Um, but yeah, I'm not too sure.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it's an emerging space, and I do worry about taking it too far and kind of giving everyone like a carbon score at some point. If they score too high, then they kind of get penalized, like a social credit score. So that's something I'm really opposed to. But at the same time, I'm also like, we need to draw down
Yeah.
CO2 like big time. So I just want to kind of be aware of who's coming at what angle. Like when you learn that ExxonMobil coined the term like carbon footprint. It's just like you want to kind of trying to be as educated as you can, which is why I like talking to people like you who are actually in the trenches doing the work. Do you want to kind of walk me through how like a greenhouse gas audits like currently works and how what your company kind of does?
For sure. I do just want to do a quick, there's so many acronyms in this industry. I said AICPA, I'm wrong. It is ANAB, ANAB. So that's the American accreditation body. That's equivalent to the SCC accreditation body. I don't want to,
Yeah.
there's so many different acronyms,
Yeah.
but yes. So when you're talking about greenhouse gas audit, are you talking about like a verification, validation audit, or are you talking about like a greenhouse gas emissions audit?
I would let's talk about emissions.
Sure.
I'm curious how that. Yeah.
Yeah, so you mentioned the term earlier, carbon footprint, which I'm a technical person, so it basically a carbon footprint is a greenhouse gas inventory um, calculation, um, and it quantifies a person's, a company's, a product's, a corporation's impact on the environment, all the way from where there's where are, if it's a corporation for example, where are their products coming from, where there's supplies coming from, how are they being sourced, how are they being mined, if they're mined, what country is it coming from, how is it being everything, all the way over to once their product is being sold, how is it being disposed of, how is it um, what is crate to cradle, wait a minute, I think that's it, or cradle, no, forget the term, but
I feel like I feel like cradles usually come first,
oh,
just
cradle
generally
to
in
grave. There you
life.
go. Cradle to grave. That's what it is.
There you go. Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and so a greenhouse gas inventory basically is we come in from a standard carbon perspective. If we were to perform a greenhouse gas inventory audit on a corporation or on a company, we come in and we try to understand a company's scope. We see, hey, what are you guys doing? What is your industry? Who are your customers? What's the end goal of this? Do you guys want to reduce your carbon footprint? And then um, we start gathering information, everything like I said, I mentioned earlier, starting from even starting from who, where's your electricity coming from? Are you burning any fossil fuels? How much are you burning? All the way over to where's your product going, if it's a product, or what are your services doing? And that a lot of the times in this industry, in the greenhouse gas world, you hear the terms scope 1, scope 2, scope 3, which is how each type of emission is categorized. Scope 1 is direct emissions caused by your company. So that could be anything from you burning natural gas all the way over to you owning a car and you burning that gasoline in that car. Scope 2 is
Mm-hmm.
indirect through electricity. So it would be how is energy coming into your facility, or how are you, if it's an office, how is that office being um, where's that electricity coming from the office? And
Powered.
then the third one is indirect, and that would be anything from you hire companies or you hire freights to come pick up your product and disperse it. And we basically take all that information and quantify it and turn it into a CO2 equivalent, which is a type of unit used
Yep.
to have one form of to have one unit so that it could be more easily digestible and actually summarized into one number. And once all that information is gathered and converted, we pull out this report and we say, here, this is what your greenhouse gas emissions are. And based on whatever the company's goals are, we either suggest recommendations on ways they could reduce it, or they just take it internally and try to review and see, is there ways for them to reduce it.
Gotcha.
It's a whole process to basically get one number that
I
says
could tell.
this is this is CO2 equivalent, or CO2e is sometimes how you see it, but when people are saying carbon neutral, that's, you need to get that number in order to claim that carbon neutrality, for example. So
Yeah, and you just explained this whole entire complex process, which is extremely necessary, and even that is not kind of fully comprehensive. You can't convert how much water you're using, how much you're paying your employees, whatever, into just like a carbon score. But this is kind of the most essential piece we've whittled down the whole environmental issue to. Of course, there's more to it, but for getting people to understanding CO2 equivalents, that makes sense. So are there two services that your company's providing? Being, I suppose the word audit would mean something like when you get your taxes audited, you've already done your taxes. So are you verifying claims that other boards or companies have made, or entities like yourself have made, and then also doing the what is it? What was the process you just described called?
The one I just described would
Compile.
have been
Yes, the one you just
would
described.
have been a greenhouse gas inventory. I say audit, but that's what most individuals are familiar with. It'd be more of like a quantification of your
Quantification.
greenhouse gas inventory or your greenhouse gas emissions. Versus
Whereas you guys, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so versus the second part of what we're offering is being a verification validation service, and it is similar to the
Yeah,
financial world where so a validation is us coming in and reviewing a claim that you're saying that hasn't actually taken place yet. So you're saying we plan on reducing our carbon footprint by blah 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 blah, and this is how we're going to do it. And there is an actual data for us to check, so that's why it's a validation. It's not as credible as a verification, which is we come in, we review all your historical information in the last XYZ years, and we say yes, they have reduced their carbon footprint by 20%, which is what they claimed. We don't actually quantify it. We just say the statement that you're making about how much you've reduced is correct, but a verification has already taken place.
hmm
Hopefully that answers.
it
Yeah.
does. And this is just not an international. This is just Canada based, right? Your company.
Our company, we are based out of Canada, but we are starting to work on several international uh, projects.
Okay.
Um, we SCC, the SCC is accepted under a voluntary carbon standard known as Vera, which I'm not sure if you're familiar with, or Gold Standard is also similar. So they're basically a voluntary carbon market where you could come in and sell carbon credits, basically. And
Okay.
so a lot of companies are coming to us, international companies, and saying, hey, we have this amazing project. We want to get our information validated and verified so we could sell these carbon credits to fund this project that is either reducing their carbon emissions by whatever amount.
Gotcha. Do you have like a little notebook with like a bunch of different acronyms? You just have to know like all the different government bodies.
No, I should though. I should. I just it gets well, even just today, as you saw, I forgot all the different acronyms. I should. I used to do that when I started working in the compliance world because just like the federal
That's funny.
government here in Canada has like 1,000 different ones, and then there's a provincial, and I was just getting overwhelmed. And then I was in the automotive industry, so it was times 1,000 other
Wow.
items that I did not know.
Yeah, so I've found like I'll be reading something and then someone will use like an acronym or something, and it really frustrates me because I'm like I want to understand what I'm reading. So now when I write, I just write everything out now because I just assume people aren't going to know things.
Yeah,
Anyways, so who is when these companies are getting audited or doing verifications, who is paying for them?
it would be the company themselves. So sometimes, like I said, it can be voluntary. There are grants depending on where you're located, where the governing body in your area could help you. But for the most part, it's the companies themselves.
Okay, and then the reason I was asking about the international thing is I was wondering because I'm thinking about the U.S. Do you have a price on carbon in Canada?
Oh, that one I'm not too sure. I
Do you have a tax on
Oh
carbon?
yeah,
Same
yeah, we
thing.
do have a carbon tax. Yeah, yeah. A lot of people.
Yeah,
It's a tricky, touchy subject that that people get angry about. So we do have
but it is in place,
yeah
right?
for things like gasoline or um I think the first thing that comes off the top of my head is there is a carbon tax on gasoline.
Do people get angry because they have to pay, or people get angry because of what I alluded to before about having like a governing body tracking like your score. You know what I'm saying about how if everyone had like a carbon score, how that would be like problematic because it's like a social credit score.
No, I don't think it's the latter. I don't think we've reached
They
that
just pay.
far.
People don't want to pay for stuff.
Yeah, they're like it's another tax, and I don't think we do get a rebate at the end of the year, but I don't think people realize that. It's to incentivize you not using things that can be harmful, which I understand, but I also understand why people would get upset, especially with gas prices recently. It's just another
Right.
thing on top of everything else that people have to pay for. So I think it's just a matter of here's another line item in my weekly expenses.
Totally. So I live in Boulder, Colorado, and people call it the Republic of. It's just a city of 100,000 people in a large state of Colorado,
Mhm.
and people call it the Republic of Boulder because we have all these different like weird laws. Like we charge 10 cents for grocery bags,
Same.
which I think is a great law. And I remember I was in the UK and someone told me that they instituted this law, and then people started bringing back like 80% of people like started bringing bags. Like it totally changed everything. I was thinking about how there's a sugary drink tax again to incentivize people to have good behavior. Yeah, you're like that's weird. And then I was talking to some guy when I like knocked on his door, and he's like, "Yeah, I never go to Boulder. I don't want to pay like $50 for an iced tea." So people definitely do get pissed off about that kind of stuff. Yeah. Anyways, long way to kind of get to. I'm wondering like. What incentive do you think these companies? I'm thinking of the U.S. because we don't have a tax on carbon. What incentive would they have to want to track their carbon footprint? Yeah, I'd love to hear your answer to that. I ask that question a lot.
So why would basically you're asking why would people be okay with a carbon tax or
Sorry, I'm going all over the
that's
place
okay,
today.
me too.
I'm like, why would the company want to pay your company to audit them and figure out their carbon footprint? Like, what's
I
their
see.
actual incentive for doing that?
Um, there could be several different incentives, but some of the most popular ones I want to say are uh, bragging rights. Just being like, hey, look, we're doing our part. We're trying to make a change. We're trying to make an impact. So look at us, buy our stuff. We care. Um, which is what we're seeing is these companies are reaching out to us to care. Another incentive could be, like I said, the voluntary carbon market. So companies um, are coming to us and saying, "Hey, we have this cool, really cool solar energy project, and because of that, we want to be able to sell these carbon credits." So there's a financial incentive. I also see, at least in the Canadian federal world, um, after uh, in the last couple of years, there's been talk about putting more pressure onto businesses and for putting more environmental pressure onto businesses. So businesses will start to have to disclose their disclose their greenhouse gas emissions, and they'll be likely putting a cap on what a certain industry, depending on the complexity, will be able to hit, if that makes sense. So
Mm.
um, once the government starts doing that, which I do see it coming because of all, not just Canadian government, but other governments internationally, um, companies will have to, first of all, quantify their carbon emissions. And second of all, if they're not able to reach those carbon emissions, buy carbon credits in order to reach that carbon goal. And so we'll probably be seeing other companies use their environmental sustainability projects to support this. So it's just there's so many different directions depending on whether it's federally, internationally, or just locally. Uh, Companies are
Right.
saying, "Hey, we actually care," and a lot of small businesses are actually reaching out to us and saying, "We really care, and we want to. What are the next steps for us?" Because a lot of companies do care; they just don't know how to become more sustainable and reduce their impact on the environment. So those are the couple two or three basically reasons why people would do it. the voluntary world, the compliance world, and marketing world.
That's a really comprehensive answer. I appreciate it. Are you aware of any companies that have pledged to go beyond carbon neutral and actually commit to drawing down, being, I would call it like a net positive company that is by being in existence is actually reducing emissions?
Yeah, so I know Shopify has a couple of, they went beyond, and they're not only just stating carbon neutrality, I think, I think they're a part of um, science-based target initiative, if I'm not mistaken. But they're they're going past carbon neutrality, and they have several different projects that they're funding internationally. Um, can't remember exactly what those projects are. Uh, there's a lot of um, Shopify is the first one that just comes up to my mind, but I just know that um, I was in the automotive world, and several different companies in the automotive world were trying to go, not necessarily above the carbon neutrality, but they were starting to fund projects that I found fascinating for an automotive industry to be a part of. So just seeing that change in the automotive world, where 20 years ago nobody would even think about a green roof or a butterfly garden or little things like that, where I'm just like, it might not be above and beyond, but like from the mindset is starting to change from the bottom, not just from the C-suite level, but we're starting to see it. We were starting to see it in the regular employee world. So again, I digress, but Shopify was
No,
one of them.
no, Shopify is a huge company. No, I'm really glad I asked because believe it or not, I asked this question a lot, and you're the first person to actually tell me a name of a large company that's actually interested in doing that. What is the Science Based Target Initiative? What is that? You mentioned that.
Um, so science-based target SBTI is
An acronym.
another acronym where it's similar to Carbon Disclosure Project, where companies are not just coming in and saying carbon neutrality; they're scientifically going in and trying to hit certain targets to meet the 1.5 degrees Celsius um, goal, the IPCC 1.5. So it's a little bit more strenuous, and once companies sign off on that, it involves a lot more work, and it involves a lot more transparency from the companies relaying what they're actually doing environmentally. So it's a cool initiative, um, but it's
Where is it coming from?
uh, I don't know who runs it. I don't know if it would be the UN, but I may be wrong.
No worries.
Yeah.
Yeah, no worries. I was just curious. I'd never heard of that. That's pretty dope.
Mm-hmm. Gives
So
you hope.
back to yeah. Well, hope is good. This podcast gives me hope. Talking to people like you is always great. Back to standard carbon. How is your company utilizing stuff like blockchain technology and machine learning to kind of make this process more like expedited or develop these statements more quickly? Because there's a whole lot of stuff to measure. When you're talking about a large multinational corporation. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So currently in the verification validation world, specifically the greenhouse gas verification validation world, it's a very uh, tedious process, and it takes a lot of effort, not just from the user's end, but from the customer's end. Or sorry, not just from the customer's end, but from the auditing end as well. So we are trying to um, keep the same amount of accuracy and um, transparency in the verification validation world, and not simplify it, but expedite it through machine learning, as well as in the greenhouse gas auditing world, which the first part I was mentioning
Yep.
30 minutes ago. Um, that one, we're trying to not just demonstrate greenhouse gas quantification, but also bring it into a world of greenhouse gas accounting, carbon accounting. So
Mhm.
we're trying to take it and relate it to not just your carbon emissions, but what your expenses are to see and use basically AI to try to pull different um, patterns and steps in a corporation that will then tell the corporation not only carbon emissions, but how are they relating to your expenses, if that makes sense.
Yeah. No, it does.
Okay. So
How many people are on your team right now?
in the standard carbon,
Yeah.
3.
Wow.
Yeah.
So how are you? Where do you even begin on something like that?
We're starting. The first steps are just creating the database to actually pull this information from. Um, the more points we have in the database, the easier it'll be for uh, the AI to actually start pulling these patterns together. Um, but I'm not a computer science person. I did a little
I,
bit of
I
programming, but
figured. Me either.
it's over my head. I could explain to you stacks and how emissions work, but it's really fascinating to me, and I love being a part of it. But the actual technical portion is a little bit over my head.
Yeah, that's how I feel about this podcast. It's very interesting, but I don't try to understand it all. And I kind of just like I love an episode where someone just like talks the whole time and I don't have to say anything, and I can just go back and listen and actually try and figure out like, all right, what were they saying? So is one of the founders like study AI or into like coding in a big way? Or is this just like a logical progression for what your main goal is?
Yeah, I kind of just grew organically. Like we started in the the verification, validation, body world, and then um, Alex, which is the CEO, he started to recognize this need for not just quantifying greenhouse gas emissions, but how can we bring together other disciplines and other industries so that they could recognize the importance of greenhouse gas reduction, and collaborating like accountants with environmental engineers is sounds really funny, but it's we're realizing it's working, which is why we're trying to bring in the carbon accounting world, because it melds the two industries together, and it's becoming a symbiotic relationship. So
No, that makes sense, and it's a very logical progression because you're dealing with for your business because you're dealing with so much data. But believe it or not, I actually feel the same way about building out my impact business or real estate business or whatever. I'm of the opinion that in 20 years, I don't think any corporations will exist without some form of artificial intelligence involved with it, if not at the base of the pyramid that is the company. So I'm already, thinking 20 years, 10 years down the line that this needs to be integrated into your business model in some way, or else I don't think you're going to be relevant. That's just my thoughts on business. Do you think that your company can help kind of pioneer a more standardized process when it comes to greenhouse gas emissions around the globe? Because it'd be really great if everyone was measuring it in the same way. I guess yeah, around the globe. I don't know if we can have anything be standard around the globe, but still, I'd love to hear your perspective on that.
ideally, yes. Realistically, maybe maybe. um, it's the issue right now is there's so many different avenues of information
Right.
to pull from. So it's a little bit overwhelming for individuals trying to navigate themselves into this world. Um, ho- hopefully, yes. Hopefully, we could create something for it to be a lot simpler and a lot less confusing for individuals. But chat with us in 10 years. Maybe we'll be
Oh, I
close.
will. Don't you
Maybe we'll
worry.
be closer to that. Maybe I'll be a lot more confident in that answer.
Yeah, what do we got? Episode 130. We'll do episode 1300 for
There you
sure.
go.
Um, when I think about a carbon score for a person, I get really concerned, and I think that should almost never happen. But when I think of a standard carbon score for a company, that doesn't sound that bad to me. So I don't know. I think there is room for that kind of stuff. So obviously startup company, 3 people. So what does your kind of day-to-day work life look like? I'm really curious.
um, as you mentioned earlier, I still wear multiple hats, so it just depends on the day and it depends on the types of projects coming in. Um, we have some validations and verifications coming up. So I'm not sure if you've done any audits, preparing for those and getting ready for those. I'm working through a couple of methodologies. So methodologies basically are quantification protocols that help certain a certain sector and a certain project quantify what their actual greenhouse gas emissions are. So I'm working on an agricultural one right now. Um, tomorrow Saturday, so I'm not working. But Monday it'll be something completely different. It'll be uh, preparing for a greenhouse gas inventory. It just depends on the week. Um, that's the cool thing about this job is it's something different every day. And
Mhm.
I like it when there's so many different things going on because I'm like, okay, I'm gonna switch to this, and I'm like, wow, I'm a part of this, and I have more things to brag about, I guess. But
Sure.
yeah, I do work from home, so I get to hang out. My dog gets to hang out with me, so that's nice. But there's a couple of weeks I may be doing site visits out in Manitoba, which is in the middle of Canada. Um, and there's projects that we're hoping to do. Yeah, it just depends. It's never a dull moment.
Totally.
It's kind of like consulting world. Sometimes you'll be in the office staring at a monitor for a week, and then sometimes you'll be in the field staring at a project that um, you were reading about for a week before. So
Indeed. So it's interesting that you started off in the corporate world, which kind of makes sense, which has a lot more like safety and security, and probably a lot more of that like monotony as well. How difficult was it for you to like find something that you were really passionate about, or that was at least a little more, perhaps more exciting? And then what were you kind of concerned at all that you would be kind of entering like an unknown, like a blue ocean, like an unknown thing? Whereas like if you work in a big company, it's kind of like a simple pecking order. You know what I'm saying?
yeah, there is a little bit of there's a lot more structure in the corporate world, and people like the corporate world because it's comfortable and it provides some benefits. But um, I just found that there was a huge disconnect because it was a larger company. Um, they were great and I did love my team, but I felt like I couldn't just go and talk to C suite and say, hey, this is the direction we should head into. Or let's talk about this, or let's expand our team. And um, versus in I really like working for a startup because I find that my opinions are valuable, and and that I'm appreciated, and that I'm a valuable member of the team. So I think it there was a little bit of uncertainty, as there always is, switching jobs, going into a slightly different industry, or especially this is my first time in a startup, so there was that uncertainty. But I think the thing that made it a lot easier is just seeing that I could work for a team that cares about not just what I do, but what the company's doing as a whole. So
Totally. Well, in a small startup, it sounds like you guys. When did your company get started? You say.
I think I started in October, but I'm pretty sure it was September, maybe. Yeah, September is when they officially. So we're still fresh. Our sister company is called Carbon Block Inc. So they've been around a little bit longer, um,
Hmm.
but they're separate from us. So it kind of Carbon Block saw the need for verification validation, um,
Hmm.
and so they created Standard Carbon as a support for that direction.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Well, I was gonna say. I mean, you're even younger than my company. Then so my company was 2020. So I was gonna say you're not like just a member of the team. Like you are the company. Like you don't work. Like nothing happens. You know what I mean? It's not like there's like three different branches with like a bunch of employees. If one person doesn't show up for the day, someone covers up. Like it's like no. Like you are the company, and
Mhm.
that's like the same thing with me. Like I'm a one man show still. So cool. Well, really cool to hear your perspective, and I appreciate the work that you're doing. It's essential. It's not necessarily the most invigorating stuff, but it's really, really essential for us to understand this key information so that people know what the right choices to are to make are. I just hope that they're willing to do that, and that's why I always like to talk about net positive companies, because we're really at that point where we can't just keep talking about carbon neutral. But that's, again, my opinion. Katherine, thank you for the time. Thanks for coming on the podcast. Thanks for what you're doing. Do you have any final pieces of advice for other young folks who are passionate about building a better world?
Don't get discouraged. There's a lot of negative media out there about the environmental world, but being a part of this industry can be sometimes negative, but overall it's net positive. And just continue doing what you're doing, and I don't know, just thanks for being a part of the environmental world and making our home, the earth, a better place. Ironically, today is actually Earth Day, so
It
I
is.
just realized that we're filming on Earth Day, so happy Earth Day. And I say every day is Earth Day, but go outside, maybe pick up some litter, bike somewhere if you can, and don't forget that we have one planet to take care of.
Agreed. I'm the same way. Every day, Earth Day, every day's Christmas for me. I enjoy it a lot. Katherine, thanks for the time. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Ethan. It was great talking to you.
You got it. All right, everybody. See you on the next one. So if you or anyone else you know is looking to buy or sell a home anywhere in the USA and would like to create thousands of dollars in donations without any cost out of pocket, please visit ccrealty.org today.